Though you've broken your vow 1,000 times, though you've broken your vow 1,000 times, come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come, 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 whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come, 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 whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come, 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 whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come, come yet again, come, come yet again, come, come yet again, come.
Welcome to the Canadian Unitarian Council's National Service on Living into Covenant. This weekend, some of us spent time together in our virtual fall gathering, exploring what covenants are, what they mean to us, how we hold ourselves accountable, and how we return to being in covenant if we have broken our agreements. Later on in the service, you'll observe reflections by the CUC board and staff on what covenants mean to them and how they show up in their lives. The videos were recorded by Ember Belmer during a board staff retreat at the end of September this year. And that was a really good opportunity for the team to renew our relationships with each other, as we hadn't met in person in over 3 years. When I was asked the question about where covenants show up in my life, I was a little stumped. I hadn't consciously framed my relationships as covenants, but that's exactly what they are. When we enter into relationships, we enter into covenants, consciously or unconsciously. My primary overarching covenant is with my children. Since the eldest of my 3 was born over 30 years ago, I have aimed to show up for them, to support them, to provide appropriate boundaries, although those teenage years were challenging, and above all, to love them. Another important covenant is with all of you, the Canadian Unitarian Council faith community. This became ever clearer during the pandemic years, and as the staff team did our thinking and planning to navigate with congregations through the pandemic and the 8 principle process, at the back of my mind, I wondered how I would account for what we were doing. Were these our best efforts? Would they help or harm our congregations and people? Who was included and who was left out? Would what we were doing lead us to a world of interdependence, love, and justice? It was really important to me to be able to fulfill my covenant with all of you. So I invite you to lean into the service, to reflect on the covenants in your own lives. Be with us with open hearts and open minds. At the end of the service, you are invited to join in our coffee hour conversation, where you'll be placed into breakout rooms to explore the question, how does or could covenants enrich your life? For those on Zoom, just stay on, and for those on YouTube, you'll be provided with a link to sign in. Welcome.
It's my pleasure to offer this reading for our chalice lighting today. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, to serve our communities, and to help one another.
My name is Bridget Toomey, and I am the website specialist for the CUC. What's important to me is my community, being true to my community and being close to my community. Also, to be a good citizen, my civic duties, I take that very seriously, and that includes being a good Canadian, voting, making sure to communicate with my my politicians, I guess, and also nature. This is extremely important to me. Keeping things in balance.
Hi, I'm Casey. I use she, her pronouns, and I work for the CUC in youth and young adult programs and events. Yeah, covenants show up in a lot of places in my life also. Most predominantly in youth and young adult spaces. At all of our events, we begin the whole event by creating a covenant together about how we're going to be together over the time, kind of co-creating that culture together. And I think, less formally have covenants with other relationships in my life, like especially with my housemates, with certain family members, certain friends. We don't often use the word covenant, but that my experience in the UU world very much informs how I approach those relationships as well.
Hi, I'm Chuck Shields. I'm the president of the board of the Canadian Unitarian Council. Yeah, covenants, I realized not too many years ago that there was an initial covenant that I experienced when I was in undergraduate school. I went to a Quaker college, and we had an honor code that guided us through our academic and social lives there. And it was very valuable, very meaningful, and that's, I guess, what I see covenants as being. That one students would come back and revisit every year, making modifications to it, bringing it up to date with things that might have changed. You know, the covenants that are in life here we've got covenants on our board. We've got a covenant at our congregation. My congregation is the First Unitarian Congregation in Ottawa. And those are ones that help guide us in how we're going to be together. The Ottawa Congregation Covenant's a bit complex. Our board covenant is a lot more to the point, I think, and I think that's probably something to keep in mind with covenants so that people can keep them, remember them, and continue acting on them.
Hi, so my name is Danielle Weber. I'm a minister working with the CUC as the Youth and Young Adult Ministry Specialist. So I work with congregations and help them organize their ministry to youth and young adults. I think covenant is a part of every aspect of my life. My husband and I just got married, and we made covenants to one another instead of vows. But also in young adult culture, anytime that I'm gathering with other young adults or participating in small groups, we create covenants. So a lot of different pieces of ritual that go around that, as well as, you know, a lot of my friends are UUs in other cities and things like that. And so covenant comes up in our relationships all the time.
Hello, I'm Reverend Deborah Falk. I am the very happy Minister Emerita from Calgary Unitarians and currently serve on the CUC board as an elected member from British Columbia, where I have retired. Yeah, as grounded as I am in this faith tradition that lifts up covenant, I see almost all of my relationships as a covenant, as an agreement that I make with others and with the planet.
My name's Eric James. I'm a youth observer to the board, the CUC board. I go to Saskatoon, or I went to Saskatoon Unitarians very regularly as a kid, but unfortunately I work Sunday mornings now, but I still reside in Saskatoon and I'm in contact with the congregation on occasion. I'm going to school to be a paramedic right now, and I've attended many youth cons throughout my life so far. So there's many different covenants within my life. The things that I've explicitly called a covenant are most often in youth cons and other youth community events. We always start off a creation of youth community, whether it's online, in person, always start with creating a covenant. It's one of the first things we do. But also just beyond what we call a covenant, but also things that are an agreement of how we interact with one another. I've created covenants very explicitly at my job, how I interact with my coworkers. When I got promoted, and that covenant changed, and how I interact with my manager and my other coworkers, but there's still a covenant there. In school, we started off the year talking about expectations of our classmates, expectations of the instructors, what expectations the instructors have of us, creating that covenant, that expectation of how we would interact with one another. And then also informally, create covenants with family members, covenants with my partner, agreements on how we interact, where we maybe haven't sat down and laid out the understanding, but there's still an understanding there of you would interact with one another with a certain amount of respect, with a certain expectation to that.
My name is Yvette Salinas. I'm on the CUC Board of Trustees, as well as Executive Director of Unicamp of Ontario and lay chaplain serving the Unitarian Church of Montreal. Yeah, so with these groups, with the board as well as with my staff colleagues, we've kind of had these evolving covenants where we recognize each other's roles in something that's much larger than ourselves and how we each fit into the organization's goals and purpose. And it just always felt to me like so comforting to know what my role was, what their role was, how we were holding each other in a group, and how we'd be gentle with each other even when there were mishaps.
I'm Linda Thompson, Reverend Linda Thompson. I'm a staff person with the Canadian Unitarian Council, and I've been a UU since 1983. Where are covenants in my life? Pretty much everywhere. I think we often have covenants and don't even name them as such. I have covenants with my family, with my siblings, about the ways that I want to be in relationship with them. Certainly there's an explicit covenant, I think that comes with spousal relationships. And so my spouse, Gary, and I have a covenant about what are the qualities we aspire to. I have a covenant with my home congregation, Hamilton. They may not all know it, but I certainly carry one with me when I show up there with my collegial colleagues.
Hi, Margaret Wanlin, Lakehead Unitarian Fellowship and the Western Region Board member on the Canadian Unitarian Council Board of Trustees. Well, I think I have covenants in 3 places. One is in my congregation, one is on the board of the CUC, and a more fundamental one, I guess I'd say, is the covenant that I have with myself.
I'm Shelley Moats, and I'm the Communications Manager at the Canadian Unitarian Council. I'm also a member of First Unitarian Church of Victoria. So I hold covenants personally, I think with my wife and with our 2 children, with my parents, and with some good friends. I would also say that there's the covenant for the church that I belong to, but also for different committees that I'm part of within the church, and of course at work too.
My name is Margaret Kaur. I'm a member of the First Unitarian Congregation of Toronto, and I'm currently the Vice President of the CUC Board. I have a sort of a complicated relationship with covenant. When I was a child, I came up with principles to guide my life. They were cooperation, communication, and common sense. I think that was my first experience with covenant. And it was a covenant that I developed to be in right relation with my parents, primarily. As I grew up, I think I adapted that covenant and eventually found that I needed a covenant for myself, to be in relationship with myself, because I think that's the hardest covenant to maintain.
and it's the easiest one to break.
My name is Kirsten Moore. I use she, her pronouns. I am one of the BC representatives on the CUC board and the board secretary. I'm also the director of Lifespan Faith Development at the Unitarian Church of Vancouver in BC. So we just talked about the board covenant with each other today, and we do covenants in our congregation. So we have the covenant of healthy relations. And I do covenant with the children's group. Each children or youth group that we form in the summer camp that we run, we start with covenant. And in some of the small group ministries, we start with covenant at the beginning of forming a new small group. My family has made a family covenant. I get really passionate talking about covenant and the way of I see it as a way of being in relationship and naming our relationship to each other and how we treat each other, how we build healthy communities, whether that's at the family level or the group level.
Hi, my name is Joan Carolyn. I'm Congregational Life Team Lead for British Columbia and Western region of the CUC. Covenant means so many different things to me. It's about relation. Some of them are written, some of them are not. But covenant, where I would like to start with my partner. We have a deep commitment to each other, and there's all kinds of elements that exist there. Covenant as well with his children who have become my children, and then the grandchildren. And there is a reciprocity, a covenant, a give and a take there. There's also covenant within my faith community, to which I'm very passionately committed, as well as covenant with my colleagues. We create a covenant when we gather for staff gatherings. So I could go on at length about that. But what I really value about these covenants is that they are created together and all parties have input.
I am a living member of the great family of all souls. I cannot improve or suffer myself without diffusing good and evil around me in an ever-enlarging sphere. I belong to this family. I am bound to it by vital bonds. I am always exerting an influence upon it. I can hardly perform an act that is confined in its consequences to myself. Others are affected by what I am and say and do, so that a single act of mine may spread and spread in widening circles through a nation or humanity. So the words of William Ellery Channing. I am a living member of the family of all souls. Do you experience life that way? I am a living member of the family of all souls. Some days I wear these words like a comfort shawl, you know, the kind that we create and we give to one another, get through hard times and let us know that we're thinking of each other. It's a warm and a relational connection, a comfort and a reminder that we are held in life and love's embrace. But on rough days, I confess that I can retreat to feeling a little isolated and as if I were alone. I lose sight of the interdependent part of that holy web which unites us. And I curl up, legs in like a scared spider, believing for those misguided moments that a person can be a solo entity, separate from all that is. I cannot improve or suffer myself without diffusing good and evil around me in an ever-enlarging sphere. I belong to this family. I am bound to it by vital bonds. I'm always exerting an influence upon it. I can hardly perform an act that is confined in its consequences to myself. I belong to this family. You belong to this family. Every being belongs. And as isolated as we may sometimes feel in our little corners of our seemingly little parts of the web, we know that these words are also true. There is no other place, no away that isn't a part of our shared existence. When we say and do and think and feel and share and ignore, when we dare to imagine, it all matters. It all matters because the ripples are real, because our influence is real. Even when it seems we have no power, even when we think we have no effect, even when we hope our actions have gone unnoticed, who we are, how we are, and how we are with one another matters. Others are affected by what I am and say and do, so that a single act of mine may spread and spread in widening circles through a nation or humanity. There is no judgment in these words of Channing's, no right or wrong. The sermon that they come from is about the complexity of God's love for the individual and for the whole, and how those two ideas can coexist at one moment, even though they seem so vastly different and sometimes even feel contradictory. But there is no prescription from Channing for the listener. I thought there would be. Preachers can be kind of like that, but there isn't. Instead, what I found was that evergreen reminder that the singular and the whole are always woven together, never without impact and influence on the other. These beautiful words stirred Shauna and I deeply when we were designing this service, planning how we would worshipfully honor the idea, the ideal of covenant. And Channing nailed it back in the 1800s, that we are one and also everything, that everything impacts every other thing. And so as people of faith, as people united by visions of dreaming and being and working together, united toward a greater good for all, we recognize the importance of remembering that we truly are interdependent, that we have freedom, and that our freedom is nothing if not accompanied by responsibility. Listen to what Alice Blair Wesley says in the book, Our Covenant. The Free Church is an organization we establish and join so that we may help each other to find over and over again in 1,000 varying time frames and settings what are our own worthiest loves, and therefore what these loves now require of us. If we would be loyal in the most meaningful sense in what we do, in our actions, in the way we live. The basic enterprise of the Free Church is too personally important ever to turn over to anything but the faithful long-term partners in the business of living with religious integrity, the living out of our real and right loves. Isn't that beautiful? The idea of living with religious integrity being living out our real and right loves. What does that look like? To help each other to find over and over again what are our own worthiest loves. to form covenantal commitments to help one another, not just once, but in 1,000 varying time frames and settings, to discover what those loves require of us, if we would be loyal in the most meaningful sense through what we do, by our actions, our promises, our intentions, and the many other ways that we live. Wesley reminds us that we covenant together to strengthen our connections, to keep the well-being of the whole in mind, to be intentional and responsible with our ideas and our actions, and most especially to support one another and as individuals and as institutions. As we discover and find our real and right loves, we need others, the wisdom and creativity, and sometimes even the judgment of others to help us discern the deeper truths. We learn over and over again that what we may believe to be real and right and true at one point in our lives can be replaced by new ideas, updated by new information, shifted by new understanding or new ways of being. When we work together with care, we help one another through life's transitions. When we hold ourselves to a higher standard, to a collective standard, we shift our sense of being between the individual and the whole, not in a linear fashion from one to the other, but in an ever-flowing spiral of interdependence. A single act of mine may spread and spread in widening circles. May we be caring and compassionate and inclusive. May we be intentional and visionary. May we always remember that we are not alone, that life is a fragile gift to be held with tender, loving care, that we are one. Blessed be.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole.
I invite you to settle into this space, this time, this now. To put your feet firmly on the floor, to feel your breathing in and out, to find a home, a space of comfort, a space of center and clarity and calm in your own body.
We're going to spend the next few minutes reflecting on the covenants we hold in our lives, or would like to hold. This is an invitation to notice, to go deeper into your own experience.
And we trust you to care for yourself during this meditative time, to only go as deeply as is safe or wise for you. There is no pressure to make yourself too vulnerable or to put yourself in harm's way.
Let's begin with the covenants we hold with others. Take a few moments to notice the places where you are connected by covenants, formal or informal, where you have promises or expectations between yourself and others. What relationship or community or congregational covenants are you a part of?
Some covenants might be temporary for an event or a weekend gathering, or they could be longer, ongoing commitments shared by partners or a community. Or there may be a vision that you carry but haven't yet shared.
Why do these covenants, the ones that are already a part of your life, matter to you? Do they strengthen and support the relationships between participants?
What have you learned about your covenants? Are things working well? Or do they need something to help them to be more nurturing or nourishing or useful?
We spend time in our communities building covenants to bring us into meaningful relationships where we gather around purpose or a shared vision.
We spend time adapting these covenants, changing as we learn and grow to help strengthen our relationships, to help us live into our intentions with both humility and conviction.
Sometimes we end or leave a covenant when it no longer fits with our vision, when we are adapting to change, when we're changing direction.
We spend time repairing our covenants, our relationships, when we have made mistakes or broken our promises, when the community or cause is important to us, when we want to move forward in a spirit of goodwill.
At the heart of every covenant, there is an essential element.
At the heart of every covenant, there is an essential element, and that essential element is you.
At the heart of every covenant is you.
Without you, there is no promise.
Without you, there is no commitment.
And to make a promise or a commitment, we need to have the ability to carry it out.
Not perfectly, but in an aspirational way, doing our best toward a shared practice.
Doing our best, which comes from our center, our ability to make a commitment, and the strength to fulfill our promises.
Doing our best to understand our gifts and our limitations. Doing our best to make promises and commitments that we intend to keep.
At the center, there is you.
At the center, there is you.
To covenant with others, we must be able to keep covenant with ourselves.
What's one promise that you have made to yourself? One personal covenant that helps you to remain in alignment, in integrity, and to hold yourself accountable.
What covenant do you keep with yourself that nurtures and nourishes you, that helps sustain your ability to covenant with others?
One promise that matters to your well-being, one commitment that helps you to be well.
What wisdom came to you in those moments of reflection?
What covenant will you practice going forward that deepens your alignment with this inner knowing?
That reminds you of your passions, that helps you hold your boundaries.
That reminds you of who you are.
That helps you to return again and again to what is good and true.
As you are each ready, we'll return to our shared space, gently, mindful that this may have been challenging for some, exhilarating or restorative for others. Spend a moment doing whatever you need. Take a few breaths, deep or shallow, sip some water, stretch, as we shift our attention from inward to communal. Hang on to your wisdom, your insight, your struggle. Hang on to your commitment to yourself.
The covenant of all souls. When William Ellery Channing wrote those words that Anne shared with you earlier, I am a living member of the great family of all souls. One of the greatest 19th century Unitarian thinkers and ministers didn't have in mind what we think of when we think of the family of all souls now. I like very much that he said, I am a living member, which implies that there are members of the great family of all souls who are no longer living, that our ancestors, what the scriptures call the great cloud of witnesses, are indeed part of the great family of all souls as well. What he didn't think of, however, I think, is of all of the other living members of that great family. Living members that are creepy crawlies and winged ones, that are plants and trees. They too are living members of the great family of all souls as we understand it now. Members of a family to which we have a covenant, that we share not only an existence, but responsibilities, care, promises. So what are the covenants of our lives? We Unitarian Universalists are a covenantal people, we say often and regularly. but we don't always richly or fully understand what that means. We have covenants, of course, with our family. Perhaps for those of us in partnerships, the kinds of relationships that we have with our spouses, perhaps that we have ritualized, are the most obvious form of covenant that we have in our lives. But we have other covenants too, the covenants of being a parent, of being someone's child, of being a citizen of a country, of the world. And whenever we have a covenant, perhaps even the greatest and the grandest of which is a covenant with the web of life itself, we find that that covenant is a mutual covenant. It's a covenant that both invites me to be a part of it and also asks something of me. It's a covenant that is not burdensome. I don't feel it as a weight upon me to be a part of the web of life. But I know that there is something that is being asked of me, not just given to me in that covenant. So how is it that we can continue to hold covenants that sustain us and that nourish us, that are not just a burdensome obligation, but something that hold us and make things more possible in our lives? Covenants hold us. They remind us of who we are because we know best who we are when we see ourselves in relationship to other people and to all of existence. Covenant is a very good thing in that way. It's something that I can't just put down because I don't feel like it on any given day. The covenant holds me all the time and won't let me go, my covenant with all of life. It gives me a sense of purpose and meaning. I have a role to fill in this large cosmos. And it reminds me that not only do I have a role to fill, but that role is something that asks me to try to be the best version of myself I can be in each moment, as well as something that invites me to continue to hold on to those covenants, to make those promises, so that all might flourish, not just me. And it occurred to me lately as I was thinking and talking with all the planners of this service about covenant as a lifelong UU, that there's one covenant we talk about least often that perhaps is the first covenant. And that's the covenant that we have with ourselves. If I'm going to covenant with other humans, if I'm going to be in covenant with all of creation, if I'm going to be in any kind of committed connection, a connection that shares a set of promises, well, I'm going to have to start with a covenant with myself. I'm going to have to know who I am. I'm going to have to make a commitment to learning and growing and relearning and regrowing my sense of myself over time. And I'm going to have to care for myself. Because how can I be in relationship to you, to anyone, if I don't know who I am? Or if I'm treating myself poorly? A covenant with myself needs to be healthy. It needs to be vibrant. It needs to be growing and changing. We've been taught all too often that self-care is selfish, but nothing could be further from the truth. Because if I am not well, how can I be loving? How can I keep any covenant to the great family of all souls if I can't keep that covenant with myself? I recently heard a Buddhist practitioner talking about the Enneagram and its connection to Buddhism. Susan Piver was talking about the Buddhist loving kindness meditation. You heard a song in this service talking about it. May I be well. May you be well. May we be well. The traditional understanding of that loving kindness meditation, which dates, she said, back 2,500 years or so ago, that in its first iteration, she said, she thinks that those who crafted it thought that we should start with the I and then move out further away from ourselves and get to the enemy or the person or persons or places in our lives that we have the most struggle with keeping good covenant and staying in right relationship. She said she thought the original creators of the loving kindness meditation did that because they thought that starting with may I be well would be the easiest thing to do. And that moving out, it would get harder and harder. Now she wondered aloud in the podcast I listened to, maybe the inverse is true. Maybe the may I be well is actually the hardest part of the loving kindness meditation. She wondered, why is it that we are so bad at wishing ourselves well? And what difference would it make if we started there, really and truly and deeply believed in our own wellness and doing things to make it so that then when we moved out in those largening spheres and circles of connection, that we would find that we were able to share and spread that same sense of wellness and love with others. It's a lovely vision. It's a vision that William Ellery Channing shared back in 1830. I am a living member of the great family of all souls. I cannot improve or suffer myself without diffusing good or evil around me in an ever-enlarging sphere. I belong to this family. I am bound to it by vital bonds, and I am always exerting an influence upon it. I can hardly perform an act that is confined in its consequences to myself. Others are affected by what I am and say and do, so that a single act of mine may spread and spread in widening circles through a nation or humanity. May the spheres of our love and our light and our wellness and our kindness be ever expanding indeed. And may our covenants be strong enough to hold us through whatever comes next. Blessed be.
Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return again, return again, return to the home of your soul. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again. Return to who you are. Return to what you are. Return to where you are. Born and reborn again. Return again. Return again. Return to the home of your soul. Return again. Return again. Return to the home of your soul. Return again. Return again. Return to where you are. Born and reborn again. Return to who you are. Return to what you are. Return to where you are. Born and reborn again. Return to who you are. Return to what you are. Return to where you are. Born and reborn again. Return to who you are. Return to who you are. Return to where you are. Born and reborn again. Return again. Return to what you are. Return to the home of your soul. Born and reborn again. Return again. Return to what you are. Return to where you are. Born and reborn again. Return again. Return again. Return to the home of your soul. Return again. Return again. Return to the home of your soul.
For this services offering, we suggest that you donate to an organization of your choice, one that you might have a covenant with, and one that has made a difference to you and to your community.
I like to be present, again, with my community and my congregation. I like to help out and be part of the events. And sometimes my point of view might be a bit different than them because they are more homogeneous in a sense. And I think it's important that I make my opinions known because sometimes they are different and they might not have been considered. And that is because I'm an immigrant and I've had a bit of a different life sometimes. And that's also a bit of a covenant that I try to hold with myself is that it's okay to disagree.
Yeah, a big part of that is being in integrity with myself, feeling that I am upholding my end of the relationship, and knowing that, especially as somebody who's often in leadership positions and in role model positions, that I'm modeling what that looks like to others as well. And frankly, I don't have to do that too much because it seems to come very naturally to a lot of the people that I work with as well, the young folks especially.
Well, I guess with myself with others as well would be to have taken on board what the covenant says. If it's a covenant for the board, that to me is something that I need to remember, be acting on when I'm in the board. And if I catch myself not having kept to the covenant, then I need to, and particularly if it relates to an interaction with somebody else on the board, talk to that person and see if it's possible to recover, make things right.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest part of covenanting is really recognizing the worth and dignity of other people and how I honor that and witness that. And so participating in conflict resolution or participating in any sort of practices where we have fallen out of covenant, it's my own need to recognize the worth and dignity in another person, to witness their truths, to understand who they are and how they value the world. That is most important. I want to understand where they're coming from, and I want to understand why they've shown up the way that they have, and attempt to do my best to witness that and to experience the challenges that they're living through, and how we can be in right relationship together in those moments of stress and challenge.
Covenant is at the very core of my understanding both of who I am and certainly who my faith tradition is. Covenant is based in relationship, based in the understanding that the most important thing in my world is the relationships that I have with other people, with communities, and with the earth. And that I step in cow pods all the time and mess up and have to figure out ways to come back into covenant in all those relationships.
Covenanting with oneself or with myself, I think it's important to be aware of you and what you need to both uphold the covenants that you have with other people, but also to create a covenant with yourself of, I can only do so much. I can only set a certain expectation for myself, and it's okay to not do everything all the time. And that I give myself the time to take a break and play some video games for a couple hours each day, or go on a nice little trip with my dog and go for a walk and just take a break from the world every once in a while, and to not put that burden on yourself to always be doing something, and to make an understanding with yourself of what am I expected to do? What do I expect of myself, so that you're not disappointed when you don't reach that unreasonable goal. You have an agreement with yourself of, this is what I'm expected to do, this is what I will do, and I will take those breaks, and I don't need to be doing everything.
I've learned about covenants through my affiliation with the UU faith, so knowing that I could have a covenant with myself has allowed me to get through some really difficult times. Leaving an abusive relationship, becoming a single mother, I was kind of in survival mode, but I kind of made this covenant with myself about what I needed to do to get through that. And as I survived, it suddenly became, now what do I want to shift the focus of this covenant to growth and living my life with love. And so much more that, like, once again, I'm gentle with myself and I'm gentle with those around me, and I know that sometimes mistakes will happen, but then I go back to this promise that I've made myself about who I want to be and why I want to be like that.
For me, a covenant is an aspirational statement. I fall short. I will always fall short. But it reminds me of the place I'm aiming for, the way I want to be in relationship. And so it becomes an accountability tool for myself. It's like, oh, Linda, you said you wanted to be in this relationship in this way, and that's getting sloppy now, isn't it? So it's a time to think about what it would take to reset and to move back towards. There's a Rumi song that we sing from our hymnal. It says, "Come, yet again, come." And the other part of that poem that comes from says, though I've broken my vows 1,000 times, come yet again, come. And that to me is a song of covenant.
Well, I view a covenant as a promise. And it's a promise to be my best self, a promise to act in a ethical, fair-minded way. And I hold that promise to myself in very high regard.
I'm thinking in terms of commitments and values, and one of the commitments that has been presenting itself a lot lately in the last couple of years is around authenticity. So really being authentic to myself, really being authentic to my values. And that implies, being very present in any given moment. And I notice that when I am not being fully present, when I'm not being authentic, it's a lot harder to maintain those commitments that I have both to myself and to others that I'm in community with.
I haven't thought of it like personally in relationship to myself necessarily, but I think when I've done some small groups, especially the UU Wellspring small group, and we talk about spiritual practices and what are our personal spiritual practices or connections. And the commitment to practicing spirituality and self-care, like, is a relationship with self. And if I think about that in relationship to myself, it ups the responsibility of taking care of my own presence in the world. When I do that, it creates more space for compassion and patience and empathy in my relationships with other people.
I really believe that you are only your best self if you take care of yourself, and if you are able to then reach out and be involved in all those other covenants. Because if you're not caring for self, it's not a good role model to others. It also doesn't leave you with any energy left over to engage. And so I have lots of learning curves. There are times when I fall back into negative patterns, but generally I'm very excited that at this point in my life, entering my mid-60s, I feel really good about who I am, where I am, and I'm excited about all the new journeys I will go on, the new covenants and relationships I will develop, and the new growth that will happen.
And as well as the internal, I think there's also this like beautiful collective reward that comes with being in covenant together and living into that and upholding it, where the community that gets created and the sense of like trust and empowerment that comes from collectively defining what we want our culture to be and what we want our relationship to be is kind of its own reward.